everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about keeping your Mac secure against malicious software. Great segue from what we talked about earlier. Lots of great security information given, a half an hour ago or so. So just a little bit about me. My name is Thomas Reed, and I am the Director of Desktop and Mobile Platforms at Malwarebytes. A big part of what I do has to do with the threat landscape for Mac. That's my special area of expertise. I've been looking at Mac malware for at least a decade now. So I've seen a lot of things and a lot of things to do and not to do. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk a little bit to start with about some of the foundations of macOS security. And this is not an exhaustive list. macOS does a lot of things to help keep you safe. But these are some that really impact specifically on the malware world. So we're going to talk about what all these are, and then we're going to look at how the bad guys are compensating. So we're kind of going to go in chronological order here, and quarantine was one of the earliest security features added to macOS back in Leopard, which was in 2007. Basically what quarantine did is when you downloaded a file using something like Safari or Mail or certain other apps, if they were using the right code to do that download, then a flag would get added called a quarantine flag. And when you tried to open an executable file like an app that had that quarantine flag on it, it would trigger a warning. So the reason for this is that at the time there was some malware out there that was pretending to be a document of some kind, like a Word document or a PDF. And you double click it thinking, okay, it's a document, it's perfectly safe, I can open this. It was actually an application, and you just double click it and it would open right up. So that's a problem. So Apple added this to alert people that the thing that they've just downloaded and are trying to open is not actually a document, it's actually an app. And so, when you see that, you should think twice. So this was one of the earliest, and some of the other security features are going to be based on this. So quarantine is going to be key for some of what we're going to talk about later. Code signing. This was also introduced around the same time, and basically this gives you a way to verify that nobody's tampered with an app before you run it. So for example, a hacker could mess with an app that you might want to download and upload it to a website, and you go and download it and don't know that it's been modified. So code signing allows you to spot those kinds of changes. If even a single byte in the executable file of the app has been changed, it will fail to open, and you'll see a message like this one on the right. Now, the neat thing about code signing is that this is a cryptographic signature. So it really cannot be modified by anyone other than the actual legit developer who created the software. So if you're old school enough like me, you probably remember the days when you might download something and it would give you like a long string of letters and numbers called a hash, and you'd have to do something to calculate the hash of the thing you downloaded and compare it to the hash on the website. That's kind of the same idea, but it's a very insecure way, because all that a hacker would have to do is modify. If they had access to the website to change the download, they could just change that hash as well. That's not really possible with code signing. XProtect is kind of a basic anti-malware, and this was introduced in Snow Leopard. And at the time, malware was starting to become more of a problem for Macs. Basically, XProtect is sort of an add-on for the quarantine messaging. So if you try and open something that has that quarantine flag on it, so you've never opened it before, Apple's XProtect process will take a look at it and see if it matches certain criteria that it uses to identify malware. And if it does, Apple will show this message here on the right, telling you that you should move the app to the trash because it contains malware. And you'll notice that there's no way to open this. Even if you wanted to open the malware for some reason, like a malware researcher might want to, you can't. And so this is great. It actually causes me some headaches sometimes when I'm trying to open something and play with a piece of malware. But for the average user, this is really great. Then later in 2012, Apple added what's called MRT, which stands for Malware Removal Tool. This was added in response to the flashback malware, which was very prevalent back in 2011 and 2012. And the big problem Apple was facing is that lots of machines were already installed. They were already infected with flashback before Apple knew about it and could take any action. So in this case, XProtect just was not sufficient. XProtect only detects things the first time you run them. So by the time Apple was finding out about flashback, it was already out there everywhere. So what they did is they built this malware removal tool, and it's basically something that scans your computer periodically and removes malware. Now Apple has kind of revamped this recently using the name XProtect Remediator, if you've heard of that. But it's really still the same technology. It's just getting a little bit of some improvements. And the biggest problem with this is that it's kind of a black box. Nobody really understands how it works, when it works, exactly what it's doing. And this is not just accidental. This is purposeful on Apple's part. They have made it very difficult to reverse engineer MRT because that hampers the bad guy's ability to get in there and figure out what MRT is looking for and then evade that. Gatekeeper is another important addition to macOS. This was added in Mountain Lion also in 2012. And this basically controls app execution. And this is a little more sophisticated than what Quarantine did and still does. So a big part of what Gatekeeper does is being able to deny execution based on code signing. So for example, if you're a developer that didn't sign your app, then most people these days can't even open it unless they know a special trick that they can use. Previous versions of macOS would let you set your Mac to allow opening apps from any developer. That setting's been taken away. You can't do that anymore. So it's gotten a lot harder to open unsigned apps, and this is Gatekeeper. Now, again, this is just like with Quarantine. Apps are only checked on the first launch, and if any kind of a problem is detected, then they're denied. System integrity protection, also, we tend to abbreviate this as SIP. It was introduced in 2015 in El Capitan. Basically, this protects all of your system files. Now, all of those system files are code signed, like the executables are code signed, so they shouldn't be able to be tampered with. But there are all kinds of other things like little settings files that could be tampered with in malicious ways, shell scripts, all kinds of things that really can't be signed in the same way. So system integrity protection sort of puts an umbrella over all of those things and says, nope, you're not allowed in here. You can't touch these things. You can look at them, but you can't touch them. And so that was a really huge step forward. Really protects the system against what we refer to as rootkits, where something malicious actually modifies system files. And then this was later in a later version of macOS. It was extended into the read-only signed system volume. So in modern macOS, not only is your system covered by system integrity protection, it's also, most of it is located on a separate partition on your disk that is marked as read-only. So nothing can make changes there, even if system integrity protection is turned off. And on top of that, it's signed. So the system can actually tell if the system volume's been messed with, and it will refuse to start up if it has. So this is really huge for protecting the integrity of macOS. And if macOS doesn't have integrity, you know, if it can be compromised, then anything can be. So this is really important. Apple also added a kind of a controversial improvement here called transparency, consent, and control. Now, I say that this was introduced in Mojave in 2018. Technically, it was there before, but it really wasn't something that anybody knew was there. It didn't have any significant impact on the user for the most part. There were some very significant changes made in Mojave, and it became very apparent. And the basic idea here is that it protects locations where sensitive data might be stored, like your documents folder, your photos folder, you know, your calendar data or your mail data. Protects all of those locations. And if an app wants to access any of that data, it has to get user consent. And macOS enforces that. And so when you see that, it kind of looks a little bit like this. And this is really the big problem with TCC, as we call it, is if you've used a recent version of macOS, you've probably seen tons of these pop-ups. You know, they're everywhere, and in an environment where you're getting so many of these kinds of pop-ups, it's very easy to be tricked into clicking the wrong one, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Notarization is one of the more recent ones. This was added in Mojave as well. This is sort of an addition to code signing. And this, you know, if a developer releases their app on the App Store, then Apple gets to look at it, they get to scan it and see if there's anything malicious in it. For developers that aren't distributing their software in the App Store, Apple doesn't have that opportunity, or at least they didn't. So with notarization, now they do. So a developer uploads their software to Apple, Apple scans it, whatever they do, we don't exactly know what they do, and they approve it or they deny it. And then once that's been done, then when macOS can tell that your app has been notarized and will let it run. In modern macOS, it has to be notarized in order to run. So we don't really know exactly what Apple's doing with notarization, but still, it's not a bad thing to have that extra requirement to check it for known malware. So we've talked all about what Apple is doing to protect you. Let's take a look at how the bad guys are getting around all of that stuff. So if we look at bypassing quarantine, XProtect, and Gatekeeper, if you remember, those all kind of depend on that quarantine flag being there when you first open an app. So there are a few things that the bad guys do to get around this. One is they can use an installer that looks very innocent and can be easily changed. And then that way, if Apple catches on and does something to block that installer, they just change it a little bit. So it's, you know, it's what we call sort of polymorphic malware, where it is changing frequently. They can also use an Apple installer, the typical kind of installer that you use for most software that requires an installer. Those installers can actually run some shell scripts as part of the installation process. And one of the things that you can do if you're malicious is you could have that shell script download something that was not actually in the installer package. And that way Apple can't even know, is that malicious? Is it legitimate? They have no idea because the bad guys change where these things are getting downloaded from all the time. And the other thing they can do is when they do download something like this, they can actually remove the quarantine flag, which allows it to run without any kind of interference from macOS. Bypassing XProtect and MRT is also fairly easy. Both of these just kind of use static rules. So you can see an example of an XProtect rule here. Basically, it just says, okay, if a file is a Mac executable and it has 2 of these 3 strings, it's malware. Well, if I'm a bad guy, I can just look at this XProtect rule and I can say, okay, I need to change those 3 strings in my code. I need to make them say something else, remove them entirely. And once I've done that, my malware gets right past these tools. You can also bypass code signing and notarization. There are a couple ways you can do this. The reason that you might want to is that Apple can actually revoke these code signatures and notarization remotely and completely kill your malware. So if that happens, your malware is no longer going to run. So what a lot of the bad guys are doing is they don't bother signing and notarizing anymore. Instead, they'll give you an installer that looks like this one here on the right that gives you instructions on how to open the file, even though it's not signed. And this is the trick that I was talking about earlier to get something that's not signed to run. So they'll tell you right there how to do it, and you open it and you're infected. Another thing that you can do to bypass code signing is if you can get some malware on the system in the first place, you can actually infect an existing app on the system and it will still run, even though it's code signed. So there is some good news about that though. macOS Ventura, when it is released, it will fix this issue. So just to demonstrate, here I've got a system that's running the latest version of Monterey, latest version of Chrome, and no particular reason I picked Chrome. It's just, a common app that everybody uses. Run this script here, Infector, which obviously is doing something not good, right? And now when I open Chrome, you'll notice it opens up just fine, but so does the calculator. Now, you probably don't know, in the security community, if you're demonstrating some kind of an exploit that allows you to run arbitrary code, the way that you demonstrate that you've just run arbitrary code is by opening up the calculator app. So in this case, I modified Chrome in order to open the calculator. Now, my code could have done all kinds of malicious things instead of opening the calculator. So the point here being, currently you can modify an app in place on the system that doesn't have a quarantine flag, and it's not, macOS isn't going to complain about it at all. But again, the good news is Ventura will fix that problem. And then bypassing system integrity protection. Don't bother. System integrity protection is really great for protecting the system itself against modification, but malware can really infect the system just fine without having to step on any of the areas that SIP protects. So for example, these 3 files here I'm showing in the right, those were just put in the user folder. They didn't require any special permission, but the machine is infected. as a result of those files being there. And then finally, bypassing TCC. So as I mentioned earlier, social engineering is really it's a big problem with TCC. You know, there are so many of these prompts popping up all the time. Plus, you've got a situation where legitimate applications have to ask for this permission. So for example, here I've got a screenshot from Malwarebytes. It really needs to have access to the full disk so that it can scan things. That is a legitimate need, but that means we have to ask for permission from the user. If we can ask for permission and other apps do the same thing, malware can do the same. In addition, if somebody were to actually turn off system integrity protection, you can directly modify the database that determines what apps have been given what permissions via TCC. And finally, there are all kinds of TCC bypass vulnerabilities. They're found all the time. They let you bypass it without any kind of special action. And I know a few guys who it seems like every couple of months they're presenting some new TCC vulnerabilities at a conference somewhere. So these things are not rare. The good news is Apple keeps on fixing them as they get found, but there seem like there are always more. So all that said, I want to talk a little bit about how you protect yourself. You know, Apple is doing some really great work, but obviously it's not perfect. Nothing ever is perfect. So I don't want anybody to think I'm picking on Apple by saying that you can bypass their stuff. It's just that nothing's ever perfect. You know, no security is ever perfect. So some things that you can do, keep your system up to date. That was talked about earlier, which is really great. That's really good information. Basically, you keep your system up to date all the time, and you've fixed all known vulnerabilities. So these 0 days, you know, by definition, a 0 day is something that was not yet known, you know, up until today. But Apple tends to fix those very, very quickly. And so keeping your system up to date ensures that those vulnerabilities are fixed, that all of the latest protective technology that Apple has developed is present. And this really raises the bar that malware has to jump over in order to infect your system. Now, the really important thing here is, you know, there's always been this kind of rule of thumb in the Mac community that the current system plus the last two are the systems that are supported. Those are the ones that are secure. It is not actually true. There's been some really good research over the last couple of years into vulnerabilities that have been fixed in more recent systems that haven't gotten fixed in older systems. And there are absolutely known vulnerabilities in older versions of macOS, older than the most current one, which is currently Monterey, that have never been fixed. And the problem with that is that if they haven't been fixed, the bad guys know about them and they can start exploiting those on an older system. So a lot of the malware that spreads through vulnerabilities, it actually relies on you not having your system completely up to date. If you're using an older system, they can target you. So another is to use good security practices. Now, this is a really vague thing to say. You know, even people in the security industry are not perfect. They don't do everything exactly right. So a few really important ones are, first of all, use a very strong login password. So no, you know, QWERTY, no password, no 1 2 3 4 5 6. You want to use something really strong, and that keeps people who have access to your computer from potentially guessing your password and getting in and maybe installing spyware. Now, another thing that you ought to do, those of you who have kids or grandkids, you probably know they just want to download the latest Minecraft mods from some sketchy website, and the next thing you know, your computer's infected. So what you should do is, if you do want to give kids or guests or somebody access to your computer for their own purposes, give them a different login. Go into System Preferences and the Users and Groups panel and set them up with a different login that is not an admin account. And that way, even if they do the worst possible and infect their account, it's all encapsulated within their account. It can't touch anything else on the machine. Also, keep File Vault turned on. This is turned on by default in all modern versions of macOS, and definitely keep it that way. That encrypts all of the data on your hard drive, so if you lose your computer or if someone steals it or gets access to it, they can't get that data off the hard drive unless they know your login password. So this really does it's really important for protecting your data. Also, obviously, don't turn off system integrity protection. We talked about the hazards of that earlier with TCC and such things. And then also, we mentioned keeping your system up to date, but also keep your apps up to date. Apps have got vulnerabilities just like the system does, and there have been a number of different pieces of malware that have spread through vulnerabilities in apps, especially browsers. So a Chrome vulnerability was mentioned earlier. That's one of the few apps that has actually resulted in Macs getting infected with malware through a vulnerability. The list is not a long one, and Google Chrome is one of the ones on that list. Also, don't be tricked by scam websites. So these are really, really common these days, and they try to imitate messages that might come from your system. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that you learn to recognize when a message is on a website in your browser or it's a message coming to you from your system. And the easiest way that you can tell if you're not sure is just hit Command H, or hide the app. If the entire message hides with your browser, it's just a website and you can ignore it. And so if you see something like this, in this case, it says that your system is infected with 3 viruses. A website can't tell you if you're infected with a virus or not. So it's a scam. All you really have to do is just close the browser window or tab. Just close that page. Don't download anything, and then don't worry about it, because you see something like this, you're not actually infected. It's just trying to trick you into downloading something that will infect you. Another common thing here is things like Flash Player. If a website says you have to download something in order to view the content on that site, be very skeptical. And this, even though Adobe has discontinued Flash Player entirely, that hasn't put a stop to these scams. And one interesting thing here to notice is this is a pretty convincing imitation of what looks like a real window, maybe a real window from System Preferences or something like that. If you don't know what you're looking for, you could be fooled into thinking that was not within your browser. So again, just check to see if this is part of your browser, if it's a fake on a web page, before you click on anything. You also might find some malicious sites that trick you into allowing notifications. And next thing you know, you're seeing something like this on your desktop. So, just tons and tons of notifications piling up. And in this case, this website has tricked somebody into giving that permission. If they click on any one of these notifications, it's going to take them to a scam website. So Don't give sites the ability to send you notifications unless you really trust the site and absolutely want their notifications. And if you do see something like this, go into your browser notification settings and turn off everything that you can, everything that you feel that you don't really want to have sending you notifications. Also, tech support scams. There are tons and tons of scammers out there pretending to be legit companies. Some of them will do cold calling, so they'll call you and pretend to be your bank or your insurance company or something like that. And they'll pretend to be some particular bank. And if you happen to use that same bank, it lends them credibility. So if you get a cold call from somebody and you're concerned it might be real, hang up the phone and call that company back on their legit number that you know. Like if it's a credit card company, look at the back of your credit card, call them on that number, and find out if there's actually a problem that they need to help you deal with. The other thing that scammers will do is what's called search engine poisoning. So if you do something like search for Malwarebytes support, for example, most of the time that should take you right to our website. However, in some cases, at times, scammers will manage to poison those results and get their result at the very top of the list. And this is an example of somebody who was pretending to be Malwarebytes customer care. You can see there's a toll-free number down there at the bottom. If you call that, they're going to ask you for access to your computer. They're going to point out all kinds of perfectly normal things that look a little scary if you don't understand what they are. And they're going to try and convince you that your computer's infected and you have to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to clean it up. So don't, if you are looking for customer support for a particular company, don't Google it. Go straight to that company's website and look at their customer support section on their site. And then a little bit of just brief mention of Malwarebytes. So use some kind of anti-malware software. Here I'm saying anti-malware instead of antivirus. It's a little more modern term because most malware these days is actually not technically a virus. There are lots of kinds of malware, and viruses are very rare on Macs these days. And if you're going to get some kind of anti-malware software, whatever you get, you definitely want to have some kind of active protection. So some kind of real-time protection that's looking at things in the background while you use your computer instead of just when you hit scan. And the reason is if you hit scan and it finds something, you were already infected. And who knows what happened, what data of yours might have been stolen. Whereas if you're using something that's actively working in the background to protect you, then it can catch those kinds of things before you get infected. And this really is, Apple has done a really good job of protecting you against lots of types of malware and some adware, but there are still some things that Apple doesn't cover and that are not things that you want on your computer. So this using some other kind of third-party anti-malware software can help to protect you against those things and gives you a second layer of protection. So think of this like the Swiss cheese model. If something gets through one of the holes in the Swiss cheese, but you slap another slice on there, you have fewer holes, fewer places for malware to get through. And then you also ought to use browser protection. So something that will do ad blocking and malicious site blocking that can help protect you against those scams we talked about in your browser. You might wonder why ad blocking falls under a security protection. And the big reason is, everybody knows ads are annoying, but increasingly in the last few years, they're being used for malvertising or malicious advertising, where somebody will manage to get a malicious ad injected into a legitimate site's advertising feed. And so you might be browsing a perfectly legitimate site that has ads, and all of a sudden you find yourself redirected to a scam website. And that's how it happens. It's through those ads. So using something that will block ads actually does increase your protection, as well as reducing some of the hassles of those ads. And if you want something like that, Malwarebytes Browser Guard is completely free, no strings attached. You know, feel free to go download it and use it all you like. And that is it. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Okay, if you have questions, please unmute and ask.
So in a case, let me start up. In a case of if malware, let's say we had your malware application. If malware is detected, does your app take measures to delete that malware, or does it take it off? You know, what does it do? Detecting is one thing, but then what happens? Does that remove does the software remove it from the computer, or what?
Yes. So what it does, and this is not unique to Malwarebytes, it's fairly common across the industry, is when that real-time protection detects something on the system, then it will do what's called quarantining it. And so basically it takes that file and it encrypts it and stows it away in a little folder somewhere, in such a, it's encrypted so that it's safe. It's not going to be able to execute anymore, and it removes the original from the system and kills it. And the reason that it will keep that encrypted copy on the system is just in case it made a mistake. So any kind of anti-malware software can make mistakes. If it makes a mistake and it quarantines something that was a legitimate file of yours, we don't want that to be permanently deleted. So you can always go back and restore it from the quarantine. But yeah, if it is malicious, then it will have been removed. You'll have information about what was removed, and it'll be there in the quarantine for you to, to see what was removed.
Would you talk again about the guard thing? I didn't catch that whole thing.
The
free guard software or something?
Oh, Browser Guard. Yeah.
Browser Guard.
Browser Guard is it's a browser extension, and it works for Safari, Chrome, Firefox, and if any of you have Windows machines somewhere, it works on Edge as well. And basically it runs in your browser, and it will block malicious sites. It will block ads. So for example, if you were to come across one of those scam sites that I talked about earlier, instead of seeing that site, you'd see something in your browser that said that it was blocked. So you'd never actually be exposed to that site, which is very, if you're never seeing it, then you're definitely not going to get infected by it.
So this brings another question to you, because you mentioned Windows. If I have Malwarebytes on my Mac machine, does that take care of my parallels and Windows stuff too, or do I need to?
It does not. So if you're using Parallels, you'd have to install something separately in Parallels.
I see. Okay.
It would be nice if we could cover that, but as far as I know, I don't know of anybody in the industry who does. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, anything else?
Going back.
Yeah,
to-
I got a quick question.
Okay.
Could you put up that site with your name, your site, so I
Oh,
can
yeah,
take a picture of it?
Yes, absolutely. Let me share my screen again. There we go.
Okay, let me take a
And
picture.
the Malwarebytes website is just malwarebytes.com as well, if you want to go to that.
Okay. Thank
Tom,
you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Going back to File Vault, that protects your information when you're not logged into your computer. Is that correct?
So I missed the first part. What protects?
What does File Vault do?
Oh, File Vault.
It protects your information when you're not logged into your computers.
Right. That's it. So let's say that you are traveling, maybe you're at the airport or something, and your computer is closed in your bag, and somebody snatches your bag and runs off with it. If you don't have File Vault installed, then somebody could set up a connection between your computer and another Mac, and they could transfer the data. They could basically treat your Mac as an external hard drive connected to another Mac. With File Vault, all of the data on your computer is encrypted, and without your login password, they can't access that at all. It's completely meaningless. And so it really protects your data against theft. Now, this has nothing to do with malware. It's all about physical access to your computer. So, it's equally important to protect your computer physically versus virtually.
Now, taking that one step further, if you're logged in to your computer, is there any way to protect individual files by encrypting them, say?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there are a variety of different things you can do. You could buy some third-party software that does encryption of files. One that I like to do because it's free and it's just part of macOS is you can actually use disk utility to create an encrypted disk image. And then you can use that almost like an external hard drive. So you make it of a certain size, set it to be encrypted, set a password on it. And then when it's mounted, it shows up as a disk on your desktop, and you can just drag files onto it. And then when you're done with it, you eject it, like you unmount it like you would a flash drive or something like that. And at that point, everything on there is encrypted. And so it's double encrypted at that point. If somebody were able to get to your computer while you're logged in, they still wouldn't be able to get into those files as long as you use a different password.
Thanks.
Yep.
I have a question, and that is, I have a relative who has a browser hijack that's looks almost identical to one called File Opener. I'm not seeing it just yet, but yeah, where is this thing? Yeah, I'm just wondering about browser hijacks and if Malwarebytes can address those kind of things.
Yeah, so we definitely, the way that a browser hijack usually happens is that you somehow get some kind of adware installed in your computer. And adware, one of the most common things it does is it changes your browser's homepage and your search engine. And so that's what people commonly refer to as a browser hijacker. We can definitely remove the source. We can remove the adware that caused that problem. What we can't do is reset your browser settings, especially in Safari. Now, in theory, we could maybe do something with Chrome or Firefox, but it gets into areas where we could potentially corrupt data if they update and we're doing something that, like they've changed the format and suddenly our software's messing stuff up. But in Safari, we can't access that data at all. We can't access the settings at all.
Yeah, the one I found is called something like, it's like a Mac file opener will damage your computer, right? I'm sure you've heard of that. It's
Yep.
actually using screens instead of Mac file opener. Just pick something else.
Yeah.
But okay, so that's something that your malware can clean up as far as removing the actual problems, and then I would have to clean up the browser settings.
Yeah, you just have to reset your home page and whatnot. And we actually have got a page on our website, on our forums, that will walk you through a whole bunch of the things that you might need to do to help clean up your computer afterwards, after you've
Right.
removed malware. And this is all stuff that we can't do on a Mac, but you can very easily do manually.
Thanks.
And then, of course, if if all of that fails, we're always there. You can always contact support or post on our forums, and somebody can help you.
Great.
Because, I mean, let's be honest, no security software is perfect. There's always going to be something that's going to get missed. No matter, you'll see all kinds of claims about 100% detection rates. Those don't exist.
Yeah.
So, I think the important thing is, making sure that you can get it solved some way, one way or another.
Yeah.
Has the company ever considered creating programs for iPad or iPhone?
We do have an app for iOS. Unfortunately, it can't scan for malware just because of Apple restrictions. No app has that kind of visibility into the system. But the app that we do have for iOS will do ad blocking and website protection, so malicious site blocking. And then it also will do like call protection and text message filtering for the, if it's a phone. Obviously, that doesn't work on an iPad. So,
What's it called?
it's called Malwarebytes Mobile Security, and it's in the App Store.
So if it's doing text screening, is that what you said?
Yes. Yeah. So it's basically, it will look for text messages that are from a known bad phone number or that contain a malicious link. We do, so it is a little bit limited in that regard. There are certain things it just can't catch, and we're hoping to be able to improve it in the next year or two, to do something a little more heuristic, a little bit more intelligent. But it does catch some pretty nasty things. So.
Yeah, I know I mean, these texts that one gets that you had mentioned earlier about, oh, Bank of America has discovered a glitch and I don't have an account with Bank of America, right? Those kinds of things. Now, are those links that are included in that something that might be caught? And is there like a known list of bad links? Is that what you have in effect?
Yeah. So basically, if it's something that we know about, if it's a link that we know is malicious and we've got a very large database, then yeah, we can block that text.
Okay. And so if it's blocking it, I mean, because the text show up on my Mac as well as on my iPhone, so would does it block also on the Mac? Does that make sense?
No. Well, so the way that iOS works, I think if we filter it to spam on your phone,
right,
it won't show up on your Mac. Now that's, it kind of depends on which machine gets it first. If it's a true text message, then it's going to go through your phone first. But if it's through messages, and we have seen some junk messages that have gone through Apple's own system, then it's really whatever device you're using at the moment that gets it first. And
Okay.
if that's your Mac, then we don't really have anything that we can do about it.
Okay. But it might eliminate some of those anyway that are
It
coming
might,
through.
yeah.
Okay. Oh, I did have another question. One more question.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember back in the day, malware or not, antivirus they'd go through and they'd do a scan, and then they'd come up and say, you've got all these viruses, and they were all emails, and they were all Windows viruses. And I never used Windows. It would just be all my Windows friends that somehow, got infected, and all this crap would be in mail. But it's an executable. It's a Microsoft, executable. So I don't really give a damn. It's, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? It's not a threat to me, and it's not anything I'm going to send on.
Yep.
And it got to be kind of annoying. I was like, don't tell me about that. Can you address that?
Yeah. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and I always hated that myself. That was one of the big reasons, is that back in the day, I never used antivirus software, because at the time it just seemed like there was never anything for it to find but Windows stuff. So what? And unfortunately, this is still kind of true with some modern antivirus and anti-malware programs, is that they'll look at your mail and they'll say, oh yeah, you've got this this Windows malware in here. The good news is that most of them are smart enough not to quarantine that, which can corrupt your mailbox. And same thing with Time Machine. Like sometimes they'll find things in Time Machine, Windows malware that got backed up into Time Machine. And fortunately, most are smart enough not to quarantine that. In our case, we don't even bother looking for Windows malware on a Mac because it can't infect your Mac. So, yeah.
That's good. That would be a good point. All right.
We may change that in the future. We may add that capability because there are some people who want it, but it will be an opt-in sort of thing. Like if you want it, you go turn it on. Otherwise, we don't want to push that on everybody.
Yeah, that would make me crazy.
I know from firsthand experience that that's not a good experience.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Is there going to be a version of Browser Guard for Opera?
Not as far as I'm aware at the moment. But I don't actually know for sure. That's Browser Guard is one of the things that's actually managed by a different team. But yeah, if it's something you're interested in, then we're always looking for feedback.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yep. I think it does work in any Chromium. Well, I should say it works. It's not tested, but I think it should work in any Chromium browser. But if I remember right, I think Opera is not based on Chromium. So
What about Brave?
I think so. Brave is based on Chromium. I think it will work there, but again, it hasn't been tested. So
thank you.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of Chromium browsers will let you install Chrome extensions. So hopefully that would work.
Are you aware that on that, I don't know who put this link here in the chat, but I clicked it for Malwarebytes Browser Guard. It says download for Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. Oh, I see. Up above it says Safari. So there just wasn't room to put that on that particular.
Well, yeah. So the first download button downloads for whatever browser you're using. If you're using Safari, then you have to get it through that second button there, which goes to the Mac App Store.
The Mac Store. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, because modern Safari extensions have to be distributed within an app that's through the App Store. So.